people, and welcome to Finest Skills Hub. Here we learn, we connect, and we grow. In this short video, we want to explore how to build a flexible annual budget with scenarios for base case, best case, and worst case. Usually when we build budgets, we try to make it come close to reality as possible. So we put in measures to, if you like, flex our inputs so that we can adjust them to cater for all scenarios. This particular case study is a build-up of an earlier budget template that we built 3 years ago that has over 80,000 views. Thank you so much for your audience. So we want to build on this and then see how we can create a template that allows us to flex our inputs. As usual, we always share the workbooks with you so you can download, start, and then come along step by step. So if you're game, join me and let's get started. Right, so this is our final work. This is an annual budget. The goal is to compare our revenue, direct costs, and expenses. Okay, so we have our revenue here, we have our direct costs here, and then we have our expenses. So the expectation is that we want to determine the bottom line at the end of the period, which is our net profit. Now, these are not static numbers. We've put in here revenue growth and expense growth. We start with the growth rates and then we adjust on a quarterly basis. Now, what makes this flexible and useful is that we are not just looking at the base case scenario. You can choose to go to the best case scenario if you want to be a bit more positive with your expectations. In that case, things like revenue growth rates, right, increase at a faster rate. Okay. We could also look at this budget using the worst case scenario where we are a bit more moderate with our expectations. Okay, so the lines that we think our model will be most sensitive to are the ones that we are going to run through a scenario so that we can switch from best, base, and then worst as you have it here. Now, there's the final output. We start off with assumptions. Okay, so as usual, these assumptions can be a bit more granular. So we have this as our base assumptions. Then the lines that we think our model will be most sensitive to, example, revenue growth, revenue lines and expense lines, we can mark these with index numbers. Okay, for these lines that have been marked, we'll get an updated input based on the scenario that we have selected. Okay, so it is this updated input that is going to be generated from this scenario page. So example, if I take revenue growth and I choose the best case scenario, then I'm working with the highest rates over here. So this is going to come into our updated input, which will then be fed into the budget, okay, so that we can have that flexible option to see our base, best, and then worst case scenarios. So that's the architecture. We are going to start from scratch and then we'll go through all this step by step. So if you're game, join me and let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start off with our assumption sheet. Now, the assumption sheet is your initial input sheet. So this is going to be the numbers for January in our case. It can be a bit more granular than this, but we are going to work with these numbers for now. So what we want to achieve is that we want to put in the revenue growth rates and expense growth rates, as well as the quarterly adjustments for the growth rates. Okay, so for our model, the model is going to be sensitive to these 4 inputs. So this is going to be number 1, that is going to be number 2, and then we'll put in 3 and 4 for this set. Apart from these, if we determine that the revenue, direct cost, and expense lines will drive our model in a sensitive way, we could now assign subsequent numbers to these. So example, revenue 1 can be 5, direct cost can be 6, and then expense 1 can be 7. The way this is designed, you could add on, okay? So any line that you think is going to drive your model, you can now put an index number to this. Now that we've put in the index numbers, what we are going to do is that we'll go to a scenarios page and then look up the label that we have assigned the index numbers to. So when you come here, this sheet is already formatted. There are no formulas here. So basically, for each number, if it's number 1, I pick the label, right? I determine the base case, the best case, and then the worst case. Now, once I get the base case, these cells, the ones you have in blue, are going to be my drivers. So if I want to increase, let's say, revenue growth by 5%, I put in 5%. By 100%, I do that. So these are blue input sheets to drive our base case up or down, right? So for each lookup, we've designed the base, best, and worst case to be able to derive the 3 numbers. So it goes all the way to 7. You could add on using the template, right? So once we select that scenario, it comes into this cell, and then we look up, and then we feed into the assumptions. So let's proceed with our lookup. So I'm going to stand in B12, and I can use any of the lookup functions, XLOOKUP, but I would prefer index match because a wider population has the index match function. But I would encourage you to use XLOOKUP if you are using Microsoft 365 or 2019 above. So let's use index. So equal to index. Okay. Now, index requires a return array. That is the answer that you are looking for. So I'm going to jump to my assumption sheet. Okay. I'm looking for the label from column B. So I'm going to highlight the whole of column B, B to B, bring in a comma, and then introduce match right in that same sheet before you switch to the scenario sheet. So with match, we need to put in our lookup value. My lookup value is the one that I'm going to match that one with. So I'll select this scenario, bring in a comma. Then for my lookup array, I'll go back to the assumption sheets, okay, after the comma, and then come and match it with column D, because it is in column D that I have my series of index numbers, right? While I'm here, I'll bring in a comma, and then choose 0 for exact match. Close my match, and then close my index. So I'm basically looking up for the label, okay, for 1. So this is the revenue growth rate. Now that I have this is a relative reference, so I can copy down for number 2 to 7. So I'll copy this, come to 2, select it, hold Control, select 3, select 4, go down, hold Control, select 5, hold Control, select 6, and then hold Control, select 7. So once I have these selected, I'll just paste in, right? So these now become my dynamic lookup values for the index numbers. Beyond the index bringing the labels, we also want to fetch the base values. Okay, so we are going to repeat the same index match this time around to bring the values associated with these labels. So to do that, we'll do another index, right? Come to my assumptions page. This time around, my focus is on column C, right? Because these have my base labels. So I'll do this, bring a comma, introduce match, okay, come to my scenario, choose the index that I have over here, just as we did earlier, bring a comma, then go back to my assumption sheets. Now, so come and match it with the index numbers I have over here, bring in a comma, and then choose exact match for this, close match, close index, and then I have my values. Okay, now based on the output, whether it's a percentage or a regular number, you have to format it appropriately, right? So this one, I'm going to increase it to 2 decimal place using the Alt key, Alt H0, Alt H0 to increase this. So we can see the detail in the second decimal place. So this is my base case, right? Now, what will be the best case for a revenue growth? That is where we increase it by the inputs that we have here. These can be changed. Okay, so the direct calculation for this is that I'll take this one, multiply this open bracket, 1 plus whatever inputs that I want here. Okay, then I'll close my bracket. So this gives me 1.1. I'll increase this to 2 decimal place as well. So the best case will be 1.05. Now I want to be copying down, so I'll repeat the formula again instead of copying down. Okay, so I'll do this times open bracket 1 plus. Now this is negative because we want to go down, right? And I'll close this, right? So this is going to be the worst case, where instead of increasing, it rather comes down below 1%. Okay, so these formulas are going to be repeated downwards. That's why I did them uniquely. So I'm going to select these, press Ctrl C, and then paste these for the rest. So you realize that I now have the same calculation for my quarterly adjusted growth rate. Okay, then when I come to expense, I'll paste this here. Now, if you notice, for expense, we have to invert the best and worst case, right? So the best case is where the growth rate is reducing, right? And then the worst case is where it is increasing. So we swapped the negative and positive in this case, right? So I'll come here and then paste this for the expense growth rate adjusted, and then come in here, paste this for revenue. So for revenue, this is an absolute number. So Control Shift 1, okay, Alt H9, Alt H9 to take up the 2 decimal place. So again, for our revenue, we increase it by 5% for best case, and then we reduce by 5% for worst case. I'll copy this and then paste this for direct cost as well. And then lastly, paste this for our expense. Okay. So what we basically done is that as long as the label comes here, base case starts, and then we have those flexible inputs. Okay. So now that we have this, what we want to do is to now create this output where if the user selects a certain scenario, base case, that is going to be number 1. Best case, that is going to be number 2. And then worst case, that is going to be number 3. We are going to do this with radio buttons. Okay. So let's come and then insert our radio buttons, which is going to feed the cell. And then we use that to know which scenario has been selected. So we'll come to our budget template. So I'm going to place the radio buttons right here. Okay, so I'll start with the first one. Now, if you don't have the developer tab, so this is an optional tab. Okay, you could always right click on any of the existing tabs. Okay, customize the ribbon, and then to your right, you have the option to activate the developer tab. So this is where we have our form controls. So I'll come to the developer tab. This is under form controls under the insert. So we are choosing the radio button or the option button right here. So I'll select this, come to N5, click, it comes in here. So I can position this nicely. We have some options. We have the option to edit. So I'll come in here and then edit this to base case. Okay, so once I have this, this is base case. Gently right click. You have access to format control. So once you click on the format control, these are the back end settings. Now, the first thing is the cell link. Where do we want it to put the 1, 2, 3? We've already determined that in the scenario page. So I'll click on this up arrow, come to the scenario page, and then use this as the output cell. All the 3 are going to feed here. I'll press enter and then activate 3D shading to make it a bit easier on the eye. Then I'll click OK. Right. So to test this, once I click on base case, what we have here is going to be 1. Now that we've determined this, we can now go duplicate it for the rest. So I'm going to gently right click on this, Control D to duplicate, and then position this in P5. Okay, so this is what I'm going to call best case, so BST. Okay, so for this one, when I select this, the expectation is that this updates to 2. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this again for the last scenario. So Control D, and then I'll push this right here. Okay, so this is going to be my worst case. So as expected, when I come in and I choose this one, I'm going to get number 3. Okay, so now that we have this, we now have to fetch what is number 1, what is number 2, what is number 3. That is the whole idea. So if I select 3, it means that the model is running, in the case of revenue growth, on 0.95. I need that as a separate line. Okay. So to get this formula, I'm going to run another index. Okay, so this is going to be index on these 3, right? Now, index basically returns a certain value based on the position, right? That is what match does. So I'll bring a comma. Instead of now bringing in the match part of this, I'll just select this output. Okay, so now this has to be fixed. So F4 to lock this, because I'll be copying this down. Then I'll close my brackets. Okay, so for this purpose, if I increase this Alt H0, Alt H0, That's a shortcut. I'm looking for number 3. Okay, so with this, I can now copy this and then paste it in the same pattern. So this is going to fetch the third one. Okay, come here, paste this one here. This is also the third one. Come here, so leave one space in each instance. So I'll come here, paste this one here. Now, this is a value, so we have to format it properly. Ctrl+Shift+1, Alt+H9 to reduce the fonts to 0 decimal place, to reduce the value to 0 decimal place. Okay, so I have this one. I'll copy this and then paste this one here. Okay, and then finally paste this one here as well. Right. So we now have something that would be responsive to whatever scenario that we have selected. Now, what we need to do is, once this has been selected, we need to now come and feed it into this updated input. So as an example, we started with 1%, but we are not working with 1%. We are now working with 0.95. I need to look up and then bring this in here. Okay. The challenge here is that if we are going to use the same revenue growth rates to look up and then bring the numbers, okay, we end up getting this value, okay, which is even blank. So we need to create a modified version of this name in a consistent way, okay, so that we can get this line in our lookup. Now to do that, we are just going to modify the original name with just an extra character consistently. So I've selected B12. I'll bring my joiner, which is the concatenation. I'm joining it with another character, bring a double quote, and then put in an exclamation mark, close my double quote. So I'm basically using the exclamation mark as a suffix, right? So when I do this, this is going to be the modified lookup value to bring what has been selected. So I'll copy this, come here, paste this here, get this for that one, paste this for the other one, come here, paste this here, paste this here, come and paste this here, and then finally, right, so you can extend this to more scenarios, more than 7. Okay, so now that we have this, we now have basis to bring whatever has been selected in our scenario. So we come to our assumption sheet. Now, the logic is simple. If I have a number assigned here, okay, then bring the updated input, which is the scenario. If not, let's run with the original one. Okay. Now, to know whether we have a number or not, we can test this using a function called isNumber. Okay, so isNumber, we run it on this cell, and then once we confirm indeed it is a number, it will return true. If not, it's false. So we are going to wrap this in an if statement. So we'll come to our equal sign, start an if statement, and say that if this is part of our index, which is the fact that it's a number, then we want you to do a lookup and then bring what the scenario says we should choose. So I'm going to start with index. Okay, so index will come to the scenario page and then look up in column E. Okay, so this is where I want my answer. Bring a comma and then introduce match. Right, so for match, we are going to come here and then select this label. Okay, now remember, when we selected this label, we joined it with the exclamation mark. So I'm going to do same here, put in the exclamation mark, okay, in a lookup value. Then bring a comma, then point it to the lookup array. So that is in my scenario, so all of them in column B. So I select B to B, bring a comma, and then choose exact match. So I'll close for match and I'll close for index. So this is my value if it is true. Okay. Now, if it is not true, then we want to run with the original selection, which is this one. Okay. So to go over, if the logical test runs and is true, bring the modified version, that is the lookup. Otherwise, let's run with the original one. Okay. So that is how we are going to do this. So I'll close this and then press enter. So if I increase this to 2 decimal place, you realize that we are currently running on the worst case scenario. if I come to my budget and then I choose base case scenario, I expect this to come back to 1%. You get the idea? If I choose the best case scenario, I expect this to run on the 1.05%. Okay. So now that we have this, we can now copy this down, right? Cautious of our format. So I'm going to go all the way down and then do a Control D. I mean, it's going to mess things up, but it shouldn't be a problem. What we need to do is that we would highlight the whole of column C, come home, use the paint or the format painter, click on this, and then come all the way to column E and then highlight this. Okay. So usually in modeling, the blue numbers are inputs and then the black are outputs. Sometimes you have green for referencing and all that. So if you look closely, you realize that we have some zeros in between. Okay. We don't want to leave this. It will be good to format this appropriately. Now, to format this to take off the zeros, we could highlight the whole of this, right? Just for learning purposes. If you want to format, you can highlight, press Ctrl 1, come to custom, right? So any of these first three can be the positive number. In Excel formatting, there are 4 ways you format: positive, negative, zeros, and text, right? So let's make room for each of these scenarios. So for a positive, we want it comma separated. It could also be a percentage, right? So this is going to be for positive values. Then you go to the next section with a semicolon. So for negative numbers, we want the same thing, but we just want a negative in front. So I'm going to copy this first one and then paste this first one, right? Then bring a semicolon. Now, because we don't want any zero showing up, we are going to skip that part and then follow on with a fourth semicolon for the text, which can be an @ Okay, so that is how we are going to format this. And then I'll click OK. So you realize that all the zeros are gone. So these zeros that are showing are technically not the regular zeros. These are the percentage for our revenue growth and expense growth. So I can highlight these two and then put in a direct percentage for these. Alt H0, Alt H0. Right. So if I do this, you realize that we are running the best case scenario. Right. So this is just how to apply some of these things. Okay. So now that we have our updated inputs, okay, so this is going to be our updated input. We now need to feed this particular version to our budget. Okay. So let's come to our budget. So for starters, let's first deal with the growth rates. So this is going to be an index. Okay, so it's a video of index and match. So I'll take this index and then come to my assumptions and then come and point it to column E. Okay, bring in a comma, introduce match. So for match, I'm matching this revenue growth. Okay, and then bring in a comma. I'm matching this with the labels in column B in my assumptions. Okay, bring a comma, choose exact match, close bracket for this, for match, and then close bracket for index. Okay, so this gives me the best case scenario for our growth rates. Okay, base case is going to be 1%, and then the worst case is going to be 0.95%. Now for this, we now going to increase it with a quarterly adjusted growth rate. Okay, so I'll stand in here, select this one, and then increase this open brackets 1 plus. I'll come to the assumption sheet, and then for revenue, I'm going to select this. Okay, so when you are selecting this, ensure that you lock it. Okay, so I'll do and then close this for that selection. So this is also going to 2 decimal place, which is 1.04. At this point, I can Control C, paste this for the third quarter, Control C, paste this for the fourth quarter. Okay, so the worst case scenario is this, and then the best case scenario is that, and then the base case scenario is this. Right. Now, let's look at a situation where in the worst case scenario, what if we don't want any growth at all? Okay, So in that case, it means once we start with the 1%, it's going to be 1% throughout. The model is sensitive to this. So if I come to my scenarios page, what it then means is that I'm going to delete this so that we are stuck at 1%. Okay. And then this one is going to be extended to minus 100% because we want to even erase that 10% growth so that we get 0. Okay. So we can modify these blue numbers. So once I come to my budget sheet, you realize that we have the 1% as a flat way throughout. That's the flexibility this gives us. If I come to my best case, we still have the positive outlook. And then the base case is where we are growing by 10%. So that's how we are going to approach this. Now that we have this, let's also feed in our expense growth. So for our expense growth, the same thing that we did, I'm going to copy this index and then paste this here. Okay, so just to be sure, this is pointing to this growth rate. Just as we did with that one, we'll come here and then select this, multiply 1 plus, and then we'll go to our assumption sheet. So for our assumption sheet, we are adjusting it by this output. Okay, now you have to lock this as well. And then I'll close my brackets for that one. Right, so in the base case scenario, I'm going to copy this, paste this here, and then copy this, paste this here. Okay, so to test what's happening here. So the best case scenario is going to be like this, and then the worst case scenario is where the expense lines are higher. Okay, so now that we've put in for the revenue and expense growth rates, what we need to do is basically duplicate or paste this index lookup for the first part of the year, which is January. So I'm going to copy this one, highlight the input cells. So first for revenue, control select for direct costs, right? Control select for these other ones. Okay, so we need to do this gently, ensuring that it's just the input cells. Control Alt V, okay, and then paste formulas. So what this is doing is essentially looking up the first updated input for January. Okay, so once we have this, we can now apply it to the rest of the months. Now that we have this base case, we just have to now find a way to apply this to the rest of the template. Now, we are not going to do this one by one. We covered this in the earlier video. Right? So what we are going to do is we just calculate the unique formulas or calculations. Okay, and then once we determine the pattern, we paste it across for revenue and expense. So first we'll do for revenue, and then we'll go on and then do for expense. And we do the final subtotals and calculations. So when I'm here, right, the growth rate is January. Okay, then I would adjust it by this one, right? Now what you need to do is ensure that you lock this on the row side. Okay, so this is going to be for February. March is going to be another calculation. So March is going to grow on February. Multiply this, open bracket, 1 plus this growth rate. Lock this at row level, $sign on the row, and then I have something like this. Okay. Then for my first quarter total, this is going to be an alt equal to taking the 3 values to my left. Right. April is a unique calculation because it grows on March. Okay, so once I get this, I'll take the March value, multiply open bracket 1 plus the 1% that I have here. Okay, F4 to lock this at row level. Right. So in terms of the revenue side, these are the unique calculations that we are supposed to do. If you take May and June, it's the same calculation as February and March, growing on the first value. Okay, so in that case, let's take these two and then paste them here. Okay, so we now have that set for the second quarter. Okay, and then our total comes in here for these 3 sets, alt equal to. Now that I have this, I can take this 4 sets, Control C, paste this here, Control C, paste this here. Right, so just to check, you realize that because of the pattern, you don't have to really do this cell by cell. Right, so I have the 4 quarter totals. Now for my So this should not be net profit. We'll bring in our net profit later. Okay, so I'm taking that off. What we basically need here is a summation of the 4 quarters totals, right? Now, because of the pattern that we've used, if I stand here and I do an alt equal to, Excel is smart enough to know that I'm after the quarterly rates. So I'll put this in here for my quarterly totals. I can just copy this. So I'll highlight the whole of this to maintain the format. Control C, okay, highlights this range, Control Alt V, and then paste formulas for the second line. So this gives me the second line. My gross revenue is going to be a sum of the two. So I'll highlight this range, Alt equal to bring in the summation for the 2 rows. So what we did for revenue, we are going to do same for expense. So we'll come here. So for this is going to be the first one, open brackets, 1 plus the expense growth rates. Okay, this I'm going to look at row level, close this, then do a unique calculation for March, which is going to grow 1 plus this at row level. So get this one, and then Alt equal to give me the first quarter, and then I'll now come do for April, growing on March, multiply this, open brackets, 1 plus this time around this growth rate, so F4, and then I'll close my brackets for that. Right, so for this purpose, we now are set to be able to copy this Control C and then paste Control V to this. Just to be sure, you can always check. So this is going on that, this is going on that, and then this is our total. So once we have this set, I'm going to highlight these 4 values and then paste them for the 3rd quarter and the 4th quarter. And then once I'm done, Alt equal to bring in this. So if we now have the first line of expense set, which behaves the same way as all the values down there. So now that I have this full range, I just have to come gently select this and then now apply it to all the expense lines, right? So I'll highlight the whole of this, okay, skip the totals, hold Control, select this one, and then just take it all the way down here, okay. So Control Alt V, then we paste this as formulas, okay. So based on the pattern that we established, this should be able to fill all the direct expenses and then the other expense lines. So let's put in the subtotals. So for our cost of goods total, I'm going to highlight the whole of this, Alt equal to, okay. And then for our gross profits, it's going to be a subtraction. So I'll highlight this, equal to our gross revenue minus our cost of goods sold, Control Enter. Okay, so this gives me that. Then for our total expenses, I'm going to highlight the whole of this, Alt equal to sum the values above, right? And then for our final value, we'll come in here, put in an equal to in the first cell, which is going to be gross profit minus our total expense. And then I'll press Control Enter. Okay, so this gives me 306477 for our worst case. Okay. Now I want to bring this value up here, okay, so that makes it easier for us to see how the numbers change. So now that I have these up here, let's see. For the best case is going to be 631. The base case is going to be 471, right? So this now is working. Okay, so now if you look at the final output, what we did was to add some color, right? So if the user selects base is gray, best is green, and then worst is going to be this soft red. Okay, so let's now learn how to make the selection a bit more elegant and easier on the eye. So to do that, what we are going to do is the formatting is in the cell that has our option button. So basically what we are going to do is, if the scenario that has been selected is 1 is gray, 2 is green, and then 3 is red, right? So these are going to connect our colors. So we stand in N5, we go home, and then we come to conditional formatting, set a new row. we are going to use a formula to determine which cells to format. Okay, so for values where this formula is true, we will select the up arrow, come to our scenario, and then we select this. So this is where the option buttons input 1, 2, and 3. So if this is equal to 1, right, that is what we want to test. If that is true, we come to our format, and then we are going to fill this with a gray. That is for the fill color. And then I'll click OK. Okay, so let's test if this is working. So once I come here and then I choose base case, we have this. So if this is working, then we can just duplicate the format and then just change the cells. Okay, so select the cell, come to home, and then come to conditional format. This time around, we are coming to manage rules. Okay, so for our current selection, this is the rule that we have. Let's set this to the worksheet. Okay, so that we see all the colors, so that we see all the formats appear here. So for this first cell, I'm going to duplicate this. Okay, I'll come to the top version that has been duplicated, edit the rule. Okay, so we are now going to say that if the output is 2, okay, the format should be green instead. Okay, then I'll click OK. Then I'll click OK for this one. But note that instead of N5, we want to rather point this to P5. So in the applies to section, we'll click on the up arrow and then gently come to P5 for our applied to cell. Okay, now you can apply it over here and then go and duplicate again for the third input. So I'll duplicate this. So come here, edit this rule. This time around, if what you have selected is 3, we want the color to be red. So we are not going to use this red. I normally like the softer red, which is in the standard version. So this is the soft red that we are looking for. I'll click OK for this and click OK for that. So when this comes, we need to apply it to cell R5, right? So I'll update this and then move this cell to R5. And then move this cell to R5 in this case, and then we apply. Okay, so click OK. Now let's test and be sure this is working. So best is green, west is red. Okay, now we can extend this to our selected cell, right? So that at least it's easier on the eye. You can match the selection with the final output. Okay, so to do that, we can again go and then duplicate and then just change the cells. So while this is here, I'll come to home. Okay, come to conditional formatting. We'll come to manage rules. Now in the current selection, you won't get anything. So let's select this worksheet. Okay, so starting with the red one, I'm going to duplicate this rule. Okay, so this is the worst case scenario. Now, when it is equal to 3, we want the format to be red and black just as it is. But in the applied to cell, right, we are going to update this and then choose this cell. Okay, so once we have this, we can apply and then we are sure that this is going to match what we have selected. So once we have the output on this same cell, let's duplicate the rule. So I'll duplicate this and then edit. So this time around, if it's 2, we'll now format and then come and then change this to green as we had it earlier. Click OK. Click OK here. This is going to be the same cell, so I don't have to change the cell. I'll apply it, then finally duplicate the last rule. So in the last rule, I'll edit this rule. This is going to be for 1, which is our base case. This time around, I'm going to choose the gray color and then I'll click OK. So click OK for this and then I'll apply the rule. Okay, so let's test and be sure this is working. So this is base case, gray to gray, best case, green to green, and then worst case, red to red. Right. So the basic idea is how to connect all the 3 sheets that we've used. That is the assumptions, the scenario, and the budget. The way we design this template, if you change your mind apart from these first four, if you want to flex any of these lines, so as an example, if it's not expense 1, I'll just delete this and then put the 7 here. So in that case, we get the worst case scenario for expense 2, which is going to run through the budget and update. So hopefully you picked up some few lessons to make your budget creation a bit more flexible. As usual, the start worksheet has been made available in the video description. You can download and practice. Thank you so much for joining and hope to see you in the next video.
If this video was helpful and you would like to receive more of these videos directly on your WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We'll add you to our broadcast list so you receive our videos directly. You can also visit our YouTube channel, Finance Skills Hub. All our old videos are here. Please subscribe for notification of new videos or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.